On behalf of the Jewish Theological Seminary, I want to say to all of you, Bruchim Habaim, welcome to JTS in Jerusalem. I'm Rabbi Matt Berkowitz, JTS's Director of Israel Programs. So honored and touched to be with all of you on this very, very special program sponsored by JTS, the seventh day of light, to bring us all together to celebrate Hanukkah and the Jewish Theological Seminary, which is such a bracha, such a blessing in all of our lives. Over the next 30 minutes, what I'd like to do with you is I want to speak to you about the origin of the Menorah. Undoubtedly, it's the most characteristic motif that we find in Jewish art. And it's important at the beginning of this journey to make the distinction, of course, between a menorah lampstand as described in Torah throughout the Bible, the lampstand connected to the Mishkan, the tabernacle, in contradistinction to the Chanukiah. The Chanukiah being the candelabrum that we light over these days of Hanukkah. The menorah that's described in Torah is a 7-branched candelabrum, and the Chanukiah, of course, is typically 9 branches, 4 on either side with the shamash, the same with the menorah, 3 branches coming out from either side of the candelabrum. The question that I want to explore together is, how did the menorah become such a central symbol of the Jewish people in Israel and the world over? And so what I'm going to do with you over these next 30 minutes is we're going to trace the journey moving from text of the biblical period to late antiquity, and then finally up to the modern period. In so many ways, this teaching that I'm sharing with you is inspired by my own teacher from the Jewish Theological Seminary, and that is Professor Lee Levine of Hebrew University, who I had the privilege of studying with as a student during my year in Israel at the Schechter Institute of Jewish Studies. Professor Lee Levine is not only ordained from the Jewish Theological Seminary, but he became a very, very famous professor of archaeology here in Israel. So let's begin. I'm going to share a screen to bring up the presentation. And as you have questions, I encourage you to put questions into the chat. Don't be shy as we go along. Hopefully, towards the end of the presentation, I'll be able to take a peek in the chat at some of the questions that come up. And certainly, if questions are not answered as we go through the course of the presentation, you are welcome to write me at maberkowitz@jtsa.edu, maberkowitz@jtsa.edu. Chris, if you could put that into the chat so people can write to my email, I'm happy to answer questions afterwards as well. On the origin of the menorah, text, art, and history. So where do we begin? We begin back in Torah with Exodus chapter 25, verses 31 through 40, where we have this very full description of the construction of the menorah in the context of the tabernacle of the Mishkan. And there we read the following: "We will make a menorah of pure gold, hammered out it will be made. Its base, its shaft, its cups, its knobs, and its blossoms will be hammered from it. 6 branches will emerge from its sides, 3 branches of the menorah from its one side, and 3 branches from the menorah from its second side. 3 cups engraved like almonds on the one branch, a knob and a flower, and 3 cups engraved like almonds on the next branch, a knob and a flower. So it will be for the 6 branches that emerge from the menorah, all of it a single hammered piece of pure gold. We will make its lamps 7. So what did this menorah, this candelabrum, connected to the tabernacle look like? Right? This is a modern rendition of what the menorah, the biblical menorah, most likely looked like, that stood in the first temple, in the second temple, and connected to the tabernacle. You can see some of the decorative aspects that Exodus describes looking at this menorah, right? The cups, the flowers, right? And the almond-shaped lights that you see at the top of the menorah. It's believed that the menorah was inspired by the natural landscape of the land of Israel. Noga Hareuveni, may his memory be for a blessing, he was the founder of the Biblical Landscape Reserve in Israel known as Neot Kedumim. And he argued that what inspired the construction of the menorah was the salvia or moriah plant that grows all over the ancient Near East. Here you're looking at that plant and you can see very easily how it would inspire the design of the menorah, right? The cups, the calyxes, the blossoms that you see there, exactly like the menorah that's described in the book of Exodus. One of the discrepancies that we encounter in the menorah is how many menorot, how many candelabra were there, right? We have the temple that stood in Shiloh, the devotional site that existed in Shiloh, and it's believed in Shiloh that is before the destruction of the Solomonic temple, right? There was one lampstand that stood there. In the first temple period, what's described in the first book of Kings is the following. The menorah, there were 5 on the right and 5 on the left, placed in front of the inner sanctum of fine gold with their flowers, lamps, and tongs of gold. Okay, again, this is describing what existed in the first temple. It seems that there were minimally 10 menorot, 10 lampstands that were there existing, standing in the first temple. In contrast to what we learn in the first book of Kings, we have this source from the second book of Chronicles that tells us, and a golden menorah and its lamps to kindle every evening, referring to only one menorah that stood in the temple. It's believed in the second temple that, in fact, there was only one lampstand, not 10, as it seems existed in the first temple. Toward the end of the second temple period, the menorah makes an appearance in a number of distinct contexts. Here you're looking at a small bronze coin that's struck by the Hasmonean ruler, Mattathias Antigonus. This comes to us from 37 BCE, right? You see the menorah stamped very, very clearly on this bronze coin. Another place in which we see the symbol of the menorah is here in Jason's tomb. Those of you who have visited Israel perhaps have been to Jason's tomb, which is famously only a few blocks away from the JTS Shokin Institute in Jerusalem. It's in the Rehavia neighborhood of Jerusalem. And there on the walls of this tomb, we have 5 menorot in graffiti etched into these walls. Right? And there you see those 5 menorot, very, very primitive menorot. That comes to us from about the 1st century BCE. And then finally, from this second temple period, we have a plaster fragment. Actually, these are 2 plaster fragments you could see in the outline of a house in the upper city of Jerusalem, found in Ir Atikah in the old city, which is from the reign of King Herod. And there you have this plaster relief of a menorah, presumably modeled off of what it is that stood in the second temple. It seems that this is from about 37 to the year 4 BCE. One of the prominent sources that we have that deals with the significance of the menorah is found in the prophet Zechariah. And here Zechariah, the prophet, is approached by an angel who asks him, "What do you see?" And Zechariah responds, "I see a menorah entirely of gold with its bowl on its top. Its 7 lamps are upon it, and there are 7 ducts for the lamps on its top. There are 2 olive trees over it, one at the right of the bowl and one on its left." Okay, somewhat challenging for us to visualize this. And so, lo and behold, we have this beautiful manuscript from Spain, 14th century Spain, circa around 1300, in which we have this illumination that is directly connected and based on Zechariah's words. There we have the lampstand, the menorah in the center, the bowls of which Zechariah speaks, and of course, the olive trees growing on either side, right? The source of the oil that will be used to kindle the menorah. Continuing on, we have the most famous depiction of the menorah that comes to us from the Arch of Titus. Those of you who have had the privilege of traveling to Rome to actually see the Arch of Titus, there you see the relief of the Roman soldiers hauling back the lampstand, right, that stood in the temple back to Rome. This is from, of course, the 1st century when the Second Temple is destroyed in 70 CE, right? And it's believed that the upper half of the menorah that you see here, that is from the stand that you see at the base above, that this is an accurate depiction of the menorah that stood in the Second Temple. As far as the base goes, it's unclear that that's exactly what the base looked like. Obviously, the base of the menorah is not described in Torah, and so the base that we have here is simply conjecture. But it's believed that the depiction that we have of the upper part of the menorah is a loyal depiction of the actual lampstand that stood in the temple. Right, there you see it again, right? A famous or infamous depiction of the menorah, the stolen menorah being carried away. After the destruction of the temple, the menorah is largely absent from Jewish artistic representations. And it seems that this absence is related to a general prohibition that's recorded in the Babylonian Talmud. It's found in multiple tractates of the Talmud, and I'd like to read this prohibition to you. It's found in tractates Menachot, Rosh Hashanah, and Avodah Zarah, and here's what the Talmud teaches us. It says the following: one should not make a house in the form of the Heichal, of the shrine, like the temple, nor should one copy the temple portico, a courtyard like the temple Azara, a table like the temple Shubrid table, a menorah like the temple menorah, but he may make a lampstand of 5, of 6, or of 8 branches, but one of 7 he should not make. It seems that this teaching that we have of the Talmud was a way of mourning the destruction of the temple, recognizing its absence, recognizing its loss. So what didn't we do? We didn't create imagery based on what existed in the temple precincts. And so one of the casualties was the depiction of the menorah. There is a 200-year absence of the symbol of the menorah, but gradually the menorah makes a comeback, and eventually it ends up making a meteoric comeback. One of the earliest depictions that we have of the menorah in a public Jewish institution is this synagogue that you're looking at from Duro Europus, which exists in Syria, dating from 245 CE or 245 AD. Notice the depiction of the menorah that we have here, right? Here you see it up close, right? And here you see it framing, right? This portico in the synagogue, right? And it's believed again that this is based on the menorah that stood in the Second Temple. Between the 4th and 7th centuries, what is known as late antiquity, we see the menorah depicted on a number of ritual items. Here on the left side, you're looking at a sarcophagus. The menorah appears on many, many sarcophagi that come to us from the Greco-Roman period. And in addition, you see it in mosaics as well. The mosaic that you see on the right side comes to us from the mosaic floor of a Beit Knesset, a synagogue in Jericho, a very, very famous Beit Knesset, right? And there you see an inscription under that menorah that says, Shalom al Yisrael, right? Peace upon Israel. You see the branch of the olive tree. And in addition to that, you also see the shofar on the right side of the menorah. By late antiquity, it had become a Jewish symbol par excellence. And again, you see that menorah carved into many, many sarcophagi. Those of you who have been to Beit Sha'arim in Israel's north and have entered the precincts of where you see those sarcophagi, you see many, many menorot, right? Again, as I said, it becomes the Jewish symbol par excellence. The menorah makes an appearance on lamps from this period, but even more than that, it seems the appearance of the menorah as a widespread Jewish symbol. Lee Levine points out that it cannot be divorced from the spread of Christianity that we see, and very, very specifically, the Byzantine Christian context in the ancient Near East. With the widespread use of the cross, right, the crucifix appearing everywhere with the rise of Christianity, there are a number of archaeological finds in which we see the use of the menorah appearing exactly where a cross would be depicted. So look at the similarity between these two lamps that you see. On the left, right, you see the cross emanating from the back end of the lamp. And on the right, you see what we have, right, an inscription of a menorah at that edge. Again, let's look at another very, very interesting comparison. Here we have what are called chancel screens, inscriptions in stone, right, that look strikingly similar to each other. The one on the left is from Hamat Gader, right, and there you see a menorah, right, sort of a wreath design going around the menorah and the vines just below it, which looks exactly like, right, a chancel screen that exists in a church in a place in Israel called Masuot Yitzchak, right? Notice the cross at the center and the crucifixes on either side, right? Again, there was this borrowing of iconography back and forth, but part of what is so powerful here, right, is that the menorah becomes the symbol of the Jewish people. Just as the early Christians were using the crucifix and the cross was spreading widely, right, across the ancient Near East and far beyond, so did the Jews feel the need to have their own symbol as well. And that's when we see the meteoric rise of the menorah after a 200-year absence. Right, again, here we see the mosaics, these very, very exquisite and intricate mosaics of the menorah, right, with lamps hanging from them. And then look at the iconography that we see in Tunisia of a cross, right, with the same lamps hanging from the cross, right? Raises the question as well of who is it that borrowed from who. I return now to the very famous imagery of the Arch of Titus, this in many ways very, very chilling imagery after the destruction of the Second Temple in 70 CE of the Romans, right, carrying away the temple appurtenances, right, back to Rome. And there we have our sacred menorah. As we approach the finish line, and it also gives me a chance to take a look at some of the questions that you're raising in the chat as well, I want to turn to this very, very liminal moment for the Jewish people and for Israel. Recall that in 70 CE, the Second Temple is destroyed. And then about 60 years after the destruction of the Second Temple, we have what is known as the Bar Kokhba Rebellion. Right? In 135 CE, we have the last stand of Bar Kokhba, right? And the Israelites, the Jews, against the Roman authorities. And with that, right, we have the crushing of Jewish sovereignty in the land of Israel. Until what year? Think about it for a moment. 135 CE, when we lose sovereignty in our ancestral homeland, the next time we regain sovereignty in that homeland is 1948. It's a miracle, lo nes katan. It's not a small miracle that all of us in this virtual Beit Midrash that JTS has created for us, right, have lived to see the miracle of the rebirth of the Jewish people in its homeland. Think about that journey from 135 CE, about 60 years after the destruction of the Second Temple, to today. What is the emblem of the state of Israel? Remember, after the state was founded in May 1948, there was a competition that was held for the design of a national emblem for the state. In a small announcement, and I'm reading to you from this wonderful book, The Light of the Menorah, the Story of a Symbol, which is published by the Israel Museum, they write, in a small announcement published in the newspaper, the public was invited to submit proposals for the design of an emblem to represent the state of Israel. The following guidelines were listed. Colors of the emblem, light blue and white. The 7-branch menorah with 7 6-pointed stars. Other proposals will also be considered. Hundreds of people from all over the country and all walks of life responded to the announcement. Unfortunately, only a few of their proposals have been preserved in posterity in the state archives. What was the winning design? There you have it, right? A recognizable emblem of the state of Israel. I want you to notice what was the design that was used for the menorah that appears on the emblem of the state of Israel. It was the same design that we see in the Arch of Titus. The Romans carried it away in 70 CE, and we returned it as a people in 1948. What a powerful statement for our country. Right there, the menorah at the center, right on its base, exactly the same menorah that appeared in the Arch of Titus, and on either side, right, the branches of the olive tree, representing not only the light of God, right, that which is used to fuel the light of the menorah and the Chanukiah that we light, but just as important, a statement of peace as well. With that, as we near the finish line, again, I want to wish you all a Chag Urim Sameach, and I want to talk a bit personally about the meaning of the Jewish Theological Seminary to this rabbi's heart. It was 21 years ago that I was ordained from the Jewish Theological Seminary, and 26 years ago that I first walked through the gates of 3080 Broadway. Why did I choose the Jewish Theological Seminary? I chose the Jewish Theological Seminary because it was a place that powerfully and in an animated way connected tradition and modernity, and realized that instead of building the ghetto walls higher and higher and higher, we are a people that needs to be deeply rooted in the world around us. It's a place that cherishes the banner of pluralism in the Jewish world. 12 years ago, I had the privilege of making Aliyah, becoming a citizen of the state of Israel. And when I was given the gift of moving here to the homeland of our people, I was also given the great gift of becoming JTS's Director of Israel Programs. As a citizen of the state of Israel, I realized the importance of pluralism, what pluralism means. This is a lesson that my fellow Israeli Jews need to learn in a deep way. And JTS is teaching that, is inculcating that. In my message to you that was sent out by JTS, I shared a very, very beautiful story that comes to you from my first year of teaching for JTS in a professional capacity. One of the most wonderful study groups I taught was hosted at Bloomberg in New York. And on my first day in Bloomberg, the person who stood by the side of the head of Bloomberg, that is Mike Bloomberg, who would go on to become the mayor of New York, Ken Cooper, a very, very dear student of mine, took me in to meet Mike. And when I was introduced as Rabbi Matt Berkowitz, Mike turned to me and wagged his finger at me and said, "You people read clergy are responsible for every conflict in this world." To which I responded, "With all due respect, Mr. Bloomberg, the problem is not the message, it's the messenger, and you have yet to meet a good messenger." Thankfully, the potentially tense moment ended in a very, very cordial way with smiles on all of our faces. But I completely understood what Mayor Bloomberg was saying in that particular moment, right? And that is, religion needs to be a constructive force in this world. Now I have the privilege of working with approximately 20 rabbinical and cantorial students that come to Israel for their required year in Israel, in our precious country. And part of what I do during that year is I help inculcate Torat Chesed, a Torah of loving kindness. That is the exquisite art and exquisite gift of the Jewish Theological Seminary. I thank all of you for logging in for this great opportunity on the 7th day of Hanukkah. I thank you for your support of JTS. And if you haven't made your gift to the Jewish Theological Seminary, please take a look in the chat. You'll see that a link just went up. You can click right there and connect directly to us. Know that you are making the greatest investment in the Jewish future by investing in the Torah of JTS. I personally cannot thank JTS enough for my own Jewish journey. And I feel that the Jewish world at large owes a great debt to the Torah that is taught day in and day out at JTS. Thank you so much. We have a couple of minutes, and I'm just going to take a quick look to see what we have in our chat here. And what is the etymology of menorah? Menorah comes from the Hebrew ner, which is light or candle, right? So candelabrum, lampstand, right? Coming from ner, the candles that we place in the lampstand, right? Very, very interesting in terms of the menorah that stood in the temple. It's described as being meshukadim, that the menorah, the lights themselves were in the shape of almonds, right? And that is connected to the Hebrew, right, shaked, which is also connected to God's watchful eye being over us, right? There are about 12 potential symbolisms of the menorah. What is the menorah a symbol of? Messianism, God, the source of Torah, the source of light, God and derivatively the tree of life, eschatological associations, redemption, messianic salvation, affiliation and identification, messianism, resurrection, a reminder of the temple, minority status of the Jewish people, divine light, the Spirit of God, symbol of the Jewish people and its faith, distinguishing Jews from Christians, a reminder of the glory of the temple and its hope for renewal. So with that, I know we have to end. I encourage you to continue with this wonderful series, and I wish you all Chag Urim Sameach from Israel. Again, if you have questions, please write them into my email, and I'm happy to answer them separately. Let this be a Hanukkah of dreams. Let this be a Hanukkah of light. And let this be a Hanukkah of Torat Chesed, a Torah of loving kindness for all of us. Thank you for your support of JTS. Toda rabah.